How's it going?
We're live, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Of course, man. It's going well. Thank you for asking. And for anybody who's joined us so far, I actually can't see that quite yet. Here in a second, I'm going to navigate to the appropriate place to follow the conversation today. But I'd just like to introduce Eli Baird, Enterprise Architect at CHG Healthcare. Eli and I go way back. We'll talk about that here in just a minute, but this is the beginning of hopefully a series of technical professionals that I'd like to have come onto these lives, tell a little bit, tell their story a little bit, and kind of help others maybe with regard to how to progress and get to a place like Eli has today. So Eli, I know we talked about it offline. Give me just a second. I'm going to go navigate to the appropriate place so we can take questions and comments. But again, really appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, thanks for that. For those of you who've seen this in the past, you kind of know that I'm trying to both host this as at the same time watching the comment section for any questions that come in real time. And again, what I'd like to do is just for those of you who have joined, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, we've got Eli Baird here, the enterprise architect, or I should say, enterprise architect. I would probably consider you the enterprise architect at CHG.
That makes one of us.
But we're going to be talking about your career journey, and I have several questions prepared. So we're going to be going over those questions. But again, for anybody who's joining who wants to ask Eli a question about his career journey, or ask me really anything as it relates to recruiting, we're open to that. That's kind of how this whole format started. But otherwise, just sit back and enjoy the conversation because I'm going to launch right in here. Eli, we met when I was an internal recruiter at CHG, and I was fortunate enough to be the guy that kind of shepherded you through the process of onboarding at CHG. Since then, you've progressed quite a bit. But can you kind of just tell the audience a little bit, maybe the potted version of your career history, where it started and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. Before I begin, I owe a lot of my kind of career success to Scotty. So I'm excited to kind of tell a little bit of my story and then how Scotty fits into it. But yeah, so I started out doing just regular web development in high school, just, kind of changing styles on certain little web pages or custom profiles or things like that. I was always just a curious person, but my true passion actually was in cinematography and finding stories about people and what makes humans inspired by the world and how we perceive the world. So I kind of went down a journey pursuing cinematography. And I had the opportunity to work with Discovery Channel and a lot of really cool cinematographers travel around the world and kind of dive into what makes us human. And that was an awesome experience to have. And a lot of the film work I would do would also kind of dovetail into these companies that wanted these documentaries, or Discovery Channel would want like little adjustments to their website, things like that. So the video work ultimately ended up needing to have some technical work to get it to display well for audiences and customers. So as I was building out my studio and kind of production company, I started getting more and more technical work, and I moved out to New York and started a little marketing and video firm. And slowly over time, people started appreciating me more and more for solving their web problems and software problems than the video production that I was doing. And it was interesting because it was a very organic shift. Often when you're telling stories, there's a lot to making a great story, even how a user engages with a website, that makes the telling of that story easy and efficient. So it just kind of naturally flowed from one to the other. And when I was in New York, my business was starting to pick up. I was starting to get stressed, starting to get overburdened, and I had to kind of juggle what I wanted to focus on. And technology started being the core of where I made my money and where I found a lot of my joy. And I could kind of tell stories in a whole different way, but be a part of people experimenting and interacting with things, which was really compelling. So I knew I needed to make a shift. And this is where Scotty comes into play. I had been running my company for 2 years, and I wanted to kind of go into a very culture-centered, people-centered company and work on their digital products that were really close to how a user interacts and how they think about their own journey. And so Scotty was my first enterprise technical recruiter. And it was actually, it was an interesting experience for me. And I'll share a little anecdote. I don't know if people want to hear this, but the reason I chose CHG is explicitly because of Scotty. I remember we were
make me blush.
I remember we were chatting, and this was an interesting thing where Scotty made a deal with me that if I came to CHG, he would take me to lunch every month that I was at CHG to check up and see how I was doing. And I in my head was like, this recruiter's good. I mean, definitely playing that long game. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But that was like, all right, I see that at least, you know, he's presenting that he cares about how I land at CHG as a part of the package. And to me, that and a few other varied pieces brought me into CHG. And funny truth to that is we went to lunch every month for 2 years straight before. So one of my favorite stories to tell about how recruiters can really impact how one engages and lands into a company. So my history goes way back with Scotty, and I love that little story. But I'm gonna kind of wrap this up pretty quickly here. So at CHG, I was brought on to the web team, the job kind of lead life cycle. So CHG is a healthcare staffing company. We coordinate physicians in hospitals and do temporary position fulfillment. And at the front part of the funnel, physicians can look through and find jobs in different states and places that they're interested in working in. And me and a team of engineers got to build that job board experience, how they look for, find jobs, how internal employees kind of curate and manage. So there was a lot of custom software applications that were internal tools that used to cater this job experience. So that was kind of my start at CHG. And then slowly I started migrating more and more core to the business into actually how do we build systems that orchestrate all of the life cycle of coordinating a physician, getting all of the credentialing necessary, and ultimately them working on patients in hospitals.
Awesome. So I'm humbled and appreciate you sharing that story. I probably should have expected you to tell it, though I didn't. I'll pay you for it later. But no, to your point, I think I'm biased, of course, and anybody who's watched these lives in the past knows that Kelly Sanchez and I, who Kelly and I both worked at CHG. but we talk a lot about, the value that recruiters can bring if this function is done right. And so really appreciate you sharing that story. I appreciate you kind of taking us through your journey. It was memory lane there for me, talking about how you got your start and the way it organically flowed. I think that's pretty cool. As a technical recruiter, I see people, some who are very deliberate in starting down this path. That's what they want to do. And many like you who more or less fall into it. There's no one right way, obviously. But again, you've progressed and continued to kind of, take on more responsibility and do more from a technical perspective as you've gone through your career. What have been some of the highlights for you, Eli, as you kind of reflect back?
It's interesting. There's a few different areas in my career where I have gained a lot of satisfaction. There's some technical achievement items that I'm proud of. I think some of the early job board applications that we built were pretty novel and unique in the industry, with how our internal process would communicate with it, how we tailored experiences for providers, I thought was really compelling and exciting. And then we've done some really cool architectural work with how we manage and orchestrate life cycles in a complex multi kind of application experience through different applications coordinating data across kind of like a horizontal plane. We've done some cool things there, but the things that stand out to me the most in my career are the team cultures that I got to be a part of, and really observing what made those team cultures exciting and engaging. Because anything that I look back on in my career that was even remotely good, the team that made it was exponentially better than the product that was created. So there's such a correlation there that I look back on my early days working on a team at CHG called the Provider Digital Experience Team, where we got to create this holistic understanding of how does a provider look at getting a new job? Where do they start the process? How do they engage with the complexities of credentialing? Things like that. And the team that was formed around that, and the excitement and engagement and level of self-ownership that team took on in ensuring that providers loved their experience was an exhilarating time for me. So it's for sure, I can look back on my career and see the cultures in the projects that I was working on as highlights for me. I don't specifically remember the lines of code that I've written, or, I think a lot of engineers love like the perfect function or something like that, but I could barely remember what I wrote in any of these applications. But the people, how we work together, those are all things that are really strongly stuck in my memory and constitute my highlights for sure.
Awesome, man. It's like a perfect segue into the next question that I have for you. That being said, I just want to pause for a second. For those that have joined this feed in the last few minutes, just want to reintroduce Eli Baird, an enterprise architect at CHG Healthcare, an individual that I know well, and someone that I really just wanted to get on today to get a sense for your background, your history, and kind of how you progressed to where you are today. And now we're going to kind of pivot to the part of the conversation that hopefully adds some value to others that see your career trajectory and say, how do I do that? You were just talking about highlights, and you were kind of focusing on people. That's no surprise to me, especially knowing, CHG's culture and the main core value of putting people first. But it does beg the question, I find as a recruiter, I'm a professional networker, right? So this is the obligatory networking question here. I'm a professional networker. I obviously value it, but I see a lot of individuals, regardless of background, but especially in the technical space, that maybe don't put as much emphasis on networking, and I don't know, that may be an unfair characterization, but what is your advice, Eli, around networking, or how have you thought about it throughout your career?
So I think a lot of people naturally do networking and don't necessarily put the phrase networking into the conversation. And networking is completely organic when you're doing value creation for other people or they're creating value for you. So I think there's a lot of ways that I'm going to speak kind of specifically to engineers who are breaking into companies and getting going. Really, you want to humble yourself to the business, understand where the business is deriving value, how they interact with their customers, what makes them successful, and deeply understand that. And then follow the breadcrumbs of who is playing a role and how are they playing a role in creating that value, and go and get to know those people, because ultimately you want to create value for other people and you need to kind of absorb how that works. And there's a very natural push and pull to networking that, you don't have to overtly call it networking. It can just be something organic as a part of, hey, I want to create amazing things for people that inspire them to act, to do things. That's a very empowering way to look at networking. And I think engineers specifically, it's probably one of the most important skills for an engineer to learn to build amazing software. Not just networking in the technical sense, like IP addresses, but networking in the social sense of how do you understand and get a sense of the world around you to make something that is not just pretty or fast, but ultimately changes the way people work for the better.
Man, that's we got to timestamp that, Eli. That was really well said, man. I really, again, I don't think I have anything to add other than just to reiterate, networking is a business buzzword, but it means so much more. And I think you put it beautifully. So thank you for that. That's awesome. What about mentors? When you think about your career, how have mentors played a role insofar as they have?
Yeah, I can, without a doubt in my mind, say I wouldn't be where I am in my career today without incredibly strong mentors and actively seeking them out. Right? I think some mentorships organically form within teams, organically form within subparts of the organization. But I think there's something really valuable about understanding how you want to make an impact and looking for people that specifically make that type of impact, and go have conversations with them and do a give and take. And I think setting up formal mentorship kind of relationships is a really powerful thing for both parties involved. I think when maybe you're a younger engineer, you have a fear of not wanting to disrupt maybe a more senior person at a company or something. You might not feel secure enough to go and have the conversation, but I can tell you with utmost confidence that the mentor-mentee relationship is beneficial to both parties. So, and if you approach trying to find people who are giving value in an area that you want to give value, and go come to a conversation acknowledging the value that they create, and work with them to help them self-analyze to see how it is that they're successful in that space. It's basically the sharpening of the stone for them, and it gives you something useful to go and take and apply in the work that you're doing. So I can't say this enough. Go find amazing mentors. offer as publicly as you can that you want to be a mentor. I think we sometimes also conflate mentorship with hierarchy in businesses. And I don't think that that's necessarily the most healthy way to approach it. I think if you're paying attention to the landscape of what you're working on and how you're breaking down problems, there are people who just, they see something slightly different, or they're approaching something in a way that you're seeing a positive impact from. And just being close to that can change the way you perceive and do your work. So I recommend having all different types of mentors in different contexts.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I, was once made aware of a term. I don't know if this was coined by the individual who told me, or if this has become a commonly used phrase, but I was made aware of what's called reverse mentoring. And in that particular context, what that individual was saying, that they're an executive at a company, but they partnered with somebody that, comes from the Gen Z generation, because that person's digitally native. And this executive was pretty far from that, right? So they were like, I can learn a ton from this individual who, for all intents and purposes, is an entry-level employee at the company, but just about, the things that the trends that we're seeing and some of the stuff that they were behind on. So again, it's a fairly public forum right now, Eli. And I just want to reiterate to everybody that Eli'd be a phenomenal mentor, but just don't inundate him too much. He's got a job to do as well. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I actively seek out and try to find a few mentors. I want to find enough mentors that my capacity stretched a little bit, because I think the opportunities to mentor is an opportunity for me to grow and understand and have more types of conversations. So even if you think someone might be a little over inundated, you won't know until you ask.
No doubt. I love it. All right, very good. So the next question I have for you, when you think back early on in your career, is there a particular piece of advice that you wish you'd have known at that time that you'd like to kind of impart to others that might be just starting out now?
I think early on, I felt like I had a lot of pressure to understand every aspect of technology in order to have a valid opinion on any aspect of an application. Like, there was this pressure to feel like unless I understood, 100% of everything it takes to build every aspect of an application, I can't have any valid opinion on what we should or shouldn't do. And I think the longer I've been in my career, the more I've realized that applications are just a representation of human process and the way humans interact with the world. And everyone comes probably more programmed to add value than they realize up front. And the technical ability to implement it is something that a team collectively grows together. But they come fully human and ready to engage in human problems.
I love that, man. It's there's no doubt, right? That's at the end of the day, the best applications are the ones that create efficiencies, improve our lives, et cetera. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's by humans for humans, right? So
right.
That's great. Just pivoting a little bit, when you guys are hiring into your team, and again, just for those of you joining, to be clear, Eli is a technologist. He's the enterprise, or one of the enterprise architects at CHG Healthcare. So we're talking here in this case about hiring, software engineers, product managers. There's a number of different things, but if there's maybe some key components that you look for as you're hiring into your team, what would you say those are?
I think a few of the components are the obvious ones. I think I do think there is like a minimum bar of technical capability for certain roles. And I think that's a healthy thing for both employers and employees to understand with each other that, you know, push come to shove, someone needs to write some code and release a product.
Indeed.
So I do think a little bit of technical competence is a strong way to get your foot in the door. But in the interview process, I usually, back when I was doing more of the standard setting and interview process stuff for CHG, and I actually consult other companies on how to do it as well. The exercise is to use a technical problem to really exercise the human that's solving the problem, not the problem itself, right? And when you're coming into a company and doing a technical assessment, the things that I look for are, is the individual digging deeper into why we're solving this problem, how this problem relates to the business, how do I ask questions to rationalize about a problem? You know, those are the things that I think a lot of companies will intrinsically look for. Whether you can do a bubble sort algorithm or some of these other types of technical assessments, they're so easily memorized and so easily produced in interviews that I almost find them as a non sequitur to a successful engagement with a company. And then beyond that, when they're solving the problem, is there the right balance of humility and excitement for the problem and the people working with you on the problem? So generally, like when you come into an interview, it can feel antagonistic, like these people on one side and I'm on the other, and it's me versus them kind of scenario. Yeah. And it creates this like stressful scenario. But I recommend to people doing interviews is like, invite everyone in to be a part of the solutioning. And you'll notice that the way you rationalize about the interview process and engage with people is a lot less antagonistic and can be a fun endeavor. And what we're looking for are great teammates. I can coach people technical skills. I can coach people on, you know, the business domain or how distributed systems work. I can coach that stuff. What I can't easily coach is that person there in a way that excites the team, engages the team, and brings a little bit more humanity into the team and makes it thrilling for everyone. So those are the things that I think we look for in our engineers. And of course, we do have some minimum standards on technical capabilities, but ultimately it's the team fit.
Great advice. I especially like the aspect of inviting the team to help, to help you solve the problem that's in front of you. Proving your your ability to collaborate. Like you mentioned, you can coach people on the technical aspect, but they have to be coachable, right? So that's great advice. I think we could probably do one of these entirely focused around, how best to prepare for technical interviews. But we won't have time for that today. I do appreciate that a lot. And again, for those joining, I've got Eli Baird, one of the enterprise architects at CHG Healthcare. Today, we're talking about his career journey and some thoughts he has for others, specifically in the technical space, on how to approach their careers. So, a couple more questions here, Eli, and then I'll let you off the hot seat.
Okay.
What do you think? So now, just thinking about the business and how, particularly, and this is a relatively vague term, but it matters what our leaders think, right? Whether we're talking about the executive leadership or middle management, what makes a good technologist in the eyes of senior leaders?
I think a good technologist is the one that can articulate the problem in such a way that anyone having a conversation completely understands the problem and then naturally flows from that deep understanding of the problem into a technical solution. So, and that's an exercised capability. It's not something that perfectly comes natural to everyone. You have to do it many times. And I mean, some people call it steel manning or something where you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the executive, of what their concerns are and what does it mean for them to be successful in their careers relative, what does it mean for the company to be successful overall relative to how do you be successful working on the project. And you have to balance all of these things, and it just takes practice. Sometimes you can step on toes or misunderstand a problem, but if you take a step back, reassess the people that, you have to assume a lot of positive intent and re-engage with how are we creating something that's ultimately going to be useful, and how do I articulate the problem such that when we iterate, you don't have to have the right solution right away, but people understand that you understand the problem enough that if you fail and you quickly turn around and do something next, that you're closing the gap, not spreading the gap of what is useful.
I think it'd be a good exercise just to pause and reiterate, to your point, you use the term steelman. And just, for those watching, if you're not familiar, that term, as far as I understand it, is making sure you're characterizing the other individual's perception of the problem, and, or in some cases, we're talking about debate here, the argument that they believe, making sure you do that up front first. And to me, the reason that I think you probably brought that up is just to your point, to make sure that you're on the same page, you're talking about the same things before you move forward. I can imagine, before I go on, is that fair to say?
Yeah. And that's, the nomenclature of steelman from the kind of debate handbook, it can come off a little bit more antagonistic than what I intend. But another way that you could approach it is fundamental empathy for the situation that people are in, and being able to demonstrate that you understand what the problem is, what the likely future for them if the problem is not addressed, and what's possible if we were to address the problem, and then do it in such a way that they are a key part in creating that solution with you, right? Yeah. So these are kind of the elements to realigning on something bigger that everyone can collaborate on and kind of keep the traction going on a project. So for me, the times that I've been most successful working with leaders is really understanding the pressures at play that are causing what we're setting as priorities and how we're focusing on things. And I think anyone in any role, that's a beneficial activity for them to go through regularly.
Yeah, that's great. And again, what I was going to say before you added that extra bit of context was just, I can imagine that you can get yourself into big trouble as an engineer, as a developer, if you don't understand the problem, that senior leadership understands, and you code a solution for the wrong problem, right? So I think that's super important. All right, last question for you before I let you run here. Where do you anticipate this space? This is a very broad brush question, but where do you anticipate the technology space going in the future? And the reason I ask again is get your crystal ball out, Eli. But the reason I ask is for those that are maybe earlier in their careers or mid-level in their careers that want to try to practice the skills necessary for a future in this space. What would your advice be to them? What do you think? Where do you think we're headed?
I think about this a lot. And I think about it almost in a consuming manner. Uh, it's a big question. I think on one hand, you have technology continually abstracting away insane complexity into utility services that people have more access to, an ability to orchestrate lots of things together that they once weren't able to do on their own. I mean, think about AWS and their SageMaker services and advanced AI technology that you can use without having to understand the deep TensorFlow algorithms that are under play or how you would code that from scratch. You have a lot of these, I mean, PhD level, long-term, abstract scientific things being turned into usable and helpful tools that people can orchestrate together. So I think the industry is going to continue to be hyper specialized in some of these areas. But what is interesting to me is not that phenomenon. I think ultimately, as a species and as people and humans, we're realizing some of the places technology can't solve, and some of the spaces that how you incentivize and promote and push technology into certain things might be causing more problems than it's necessarily solving. So to me, where do I think technology is going? I think technology is always going to keep moving forward due to the nature of innovation. But I think as technologists, we're going to have to do a better job of understanding the human psychology and how that affects the way we interact with each other in person and online, and the metrics that we choose to chase and how those incentivize the way we innovate. Because, I mean, we have to take aspects of kind of tangential impacts of the things that we're building and try to internalize them into the systems that we're building, you know, externalities into internalities. So these are, I think what I'm excited to see is we're going to see a whole new suite of engineers entering the space that don't necessarily have to be the perfect algo genius, but their goal is to be the better human and think about things more holistically. So I'm really excited to see the way people start approaching technology as it relates to living a happy and fulfilled life. So I think we're going to start seeing some big shifts there. I know I spend a lot of my time researching how people interact with technology and how we can do that in ways that garner further appreciation for each other, that garner a belief in something great and possible, right? So these I think are going to be shifts, and they're going to be shifts because I think we're all feeling the pressures of how we've incentivized a lot of technology in the past.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to wrap this conversation. And I guess I would only ask, you know, where, if there are any, not to put you on the spot, but if there are any accessible to those of us that are not technologists, any resources you'd recommend for some of those trends and you know, some of the things you've discovered or uncovered, so to speak, that speak to that. You know, essentially, I think as a layperson, my understanding of what you just shared is some of the things that technology is producing in terms of human feeling they're negative, right? And they were obviously unintended consequences based on incentives that are, you know, economic in nature primarily. So are there any, again, accessible resources that you would point the audience toward as to where that's headed? And I love that you're optimistic about it, by the way. I am as well.
Yeah, I think I think humans ultimately want to, they want to feel fulfilled. They want to live a long and satisfied life, and technology isn't going away. So in order to achieve one, we're going to have to adjust the other.
Indeed.
So I'm very, very optimistic. I don't have a ton of specific sources off the top of my head. Would it be okay if I maybe gather some sources and give them to you, and maybe you could list them in a way for the people who maybe would watch or listen to the stream?
No doubt.
I know there's a whole swath of psychologists that, I casually follow on social media and on the internet. And, I'm trying to pick apart what is sensationalizing certain aspects of the way we behave and some that are more realistic, and then trying to do a little sense making and figure out how do we adjust everything. So I don't have perfect answers. I'm usually one to be very conservative about over touting any resource as the solution. Fair. Because I think solutions are generally more emergent through lots of conversations and seeing what does and doesn't work. So, but yeah, I'll try to point towards a few of the things that I've been excited about lately.
Cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, no rush. I'll drop that into the comment section here on this feed, and then same thing with the comment section on the YouTube feed. Eli, thanks so much. I think I took more of your time than I expected, probably than you expected as well. And I know, all of our time is the most precious resource we have. So thank you again for spending it with me today. Again, thanks folks for watching. We had people in and out of this, so I'm not entirely sure how many of you watch start to finish, but you can always find it here on my LinkedIn page. And yeah, Eli Baird, Enterprise Architect at CHG Healthcare. Thank you again for coming on, man. Maybe I can entice you to come back, though. It's hard to get out to lunch on a monthly basis now that you're in Maine. So
yeah, a little bit of a distance.
Indeed. We'll make it happen again one of these days. All right, sir. Have a great rest of your day. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you.
See you.